or it was just
No, yeah. I think it's just me,
okay.
It's honestly just me.
Hello, welcome back to this week's episode of After Office Hours. Today we have Mr. Nelson. So if you just want to start with a quick introduction, your role at Govs, who you are, things like that.
Sure. I didn't have either of you in world history, but I oftentimes refer to myself as my real name, which is Poppery Doppenkoppen Noppelsoppen. Right, so that's my real name. No one has quite been able to figure out why that's my real name, but maybe by the end of this year when you guys graduate, you can figure it out. So that's my real name. You don't have to call me that.
We can try and work that out.
You can
by
work
the end
that
of
out.
the year.
So my role. So I'm presently teaching history. I'm teaching 3 world history classes and a senior post-World War II class in the fall and a senior elective African studies in the spring. I'm still working in the cottage dorm, and I've worked in cottage forever, and I lived in cottage for a long time, so I really enjoy that. And for my coaching duties, I'm doing third soccer, which is an absolute blast, and the varsity tennis team with Mr. Faulkner, which I love. So you might know that I did do the varsity tennis for 20 years, but I'm enjoying working with Jake as an assistant. And then I did the varsity soccer for 20 years, working with Mr. Karen for a lot of years and Mr. DeLay for a lot of years. So it's obviously working with those two was just a complete joy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I think I want to try to start by getting into your upbringing. So if you can describe, I got a pretty good source, your son. I asked him.
I'm not sure that's a good source.
It's a great source.
a lot of false news comes out of
So we'll get to the bottom of what's real and what's not. But he told me you grew up in a pretty big family. So if you could describe kind of what that was like and how that affected you and how it helped you.
So I grew up. I'm one of 8. And 2 of the 8 are half brothers, but I come from a really big family. And my half brothers too sort of became part of our nuclear family of 6. So they spent a lot of time with my mom and my stepdad. So that's kind of a little bit unusual.
Yeah.
So my mother sort of adopted Evan and Peter. So that was really kind of nice. I grew up just outside Boston in Lincoln, Mass. So I don't know if you know anything about Lincoln, but it's a pretty rural suburb, 15 miles outside Boston and Cambridge. And it was, I don't know, I would say it was a pretty idyllic way to grow up. We walked to school. We had a great neighborhood. We had great friends in our neighborhood and spent a lot of time outside. I grew up on a mini farm, so we had horses and goats and chickens and a pig and lots of cats and lots of dogs, and my mother just loved animals. So I can look back at my childhood growing up as being I don't know, pretty amazing in a lot of respects. I will say, Lincoln was not a diverse town or not a diverse community. So it was very, very white. And then I went on to Lincoln Sudbury, and I would say the profile of Lincoln Sudbury was pretty the same. So I didn't really think about that a whole lot growing up, but in looking back upon it, I realize sort of how, in a lot of ways, how narrow my upbringing was. Though I was certainly incredibly happy as a child in most respects.
That's awesome.
And I was a huge sports fan. So I grew up being an incredibly loyal Red Sox fan, an incredibly loyal Celtics fan, and fell in love with the Bruins. So how lucky I was, because the Red Sox won the pennant in '67. I could name every player on the team. The Bruins won 2 Stanley Cups with Bobby Orr, my boyhood idol, and of course all those teams of the great Bill Russell era that I watched when I was younger, with and Larry Bird and Parrish and McHale. So I was really lucky to grow up supporting Boston teams that were incredibly fun to watch and incredibly successful.
What a time to be a fan.
Yeah, it was a great time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so just from going around campus and asking students who we think we should have on the podcast, you were definitely number one choice. And a lot of people really want to hear about your experience traveling. We know you're a very well traveled man. You've seen a lot of the world. So if you just like maybe know how many countries you've been to, which was your favorite, things, anything like that.
I mean, I don't think I would call myself really well traveled. I have had the opportunity to go to a bunch of places, and I feel very fortunate about that. I did not grow up, I think, like a lot of Gov students traveling. Mm-hmm. So I didn't go. I did a cross-country trip with a family in 7th grade, but I didn't go overseas. I never went to Canada growing up until I was in college. So I didn't do a whole lot of, I did the typical in college spring break trips down to Florida where we, drive 24 hours and spend a week or two, and then the long drive home. But I don't know what people would like to hear about. I would say, I think one of your questions that I read was, what was maybe the place that you went to that was most different?
Yeah.
And I would say after college, I went to Ghana in West Africa, which was a really, really different place to go. And I went through college and was an American Studies major, and I had no idea what I wanted to do after college. I had friends who were going right to business school, which is unusual, right to law school, or going into teaching careers, or I didn't really have any direction like that. So I don't, what am I going to do? And I happened to take a class in the spring semester of my senior year called, I think it was called Third World Development. I don't think I'm sure that course is not titled that any longer, maybe less developed countries. So I got interested in less developed countries through taking that class. So I remember going to the sort of the career placement office and saying, I have no idea what I want to do, but I was really interested in this class that I took. And someone there said, well, have you ever thought of going into the Peace Corps? So that got me, sort of piqued my interest in the Peace Corps. So I ended up going to Ghana, and it was, I remember distinctly flying out of New York City, flying into Dakar, Senegal. There wasn't a direct flight. Flying into Monrovia, Liberia, and then landing in Accra, Ghana. And it was sort of funny about that. It was a huge Pan Am, jet, and there was no one on it. So that was a little worrisome. No one seems to want to go to this place that I was going to. And then I'll never forget walking off the plane, down the stairs, and then walking on the tarmac. And I remember saying to myself, seriously, I know I'm no longer in Kansas anymore. It was just incredibly, incredibly hot. Obviously, it's always hotter on tarmac, but it's incredibly humid. And I don't think I'd ever experienced sort of a blast of heat as I experienced getting off that airplane. So that was, and then I got very sick right away. It was also interesting for me because I'd never been sick. I was really lucky growing up. And, obviously I got the usual sicknesses, but nothing I could remember. And I don't know, probably a week into being there, I got a terrible case of dysentery. Oh. And I don't need to describe dysentery. But oftentimes people die of it because they essentially you get really, really dehydrated. But I spent a bunch of nights at a hospital there. In the hospital, my hospital bed was like this table we're sitting at with no mattress. Oh my gosh. So that was sort of the start of my experience there, getting sick and getting an understanding of how the healthcare system works. So that, obviously, I realized I was in a very, very different place. And it was just, everything was really different. The food was really different, and the music was really different. But I absolutely loved it and embraced it, and I loved being in some place where I'd never been. Obviously, a sort of a member of the minority group, sort of anywhere in my life, and obviously there I was very much in the minority, and I think that's a really great experience for everyone to have, because I think it really teaches you to empathize in a lot of ways. And also, I think being sick really helped me to empathize with other people who are sick as well. Just knowing just sort of how horrible that can be and how lonely it can be. And it was a time where it was also a time of where I very, very much felt alone because I just come out of college, which is so social, and I was always doing fun things with my friends. And I went to Ghana, and I was pretty much on my own wherever I was. So it was pretty lonely, and I would say isolating. And being sick and alone, I think makes
in a new place too.
In a new place makes it even that much more challenging and scary, I guess.
You kind of spoke to it there, but I think some people, we grow up in these bubbles and we don't even realize it. Like me, I growing up in Wyndham, very similar to you. It's a very white town. Our school was predominantly white. Yeah. And then coming here, I'm living in a dorm with people from Hong Kong, Vietnam, some people from Great Britain. Like, it's just something I'd never experienced before, and I'm so glad that I did it, because living with all these people, you get all these insane stories of just different stuff that goes on, and you get these new perspectives. And you talk about, your first experience outside of, I guess you could say, the U.S. is you go to this new place, you're sick, you don't have that social scene to kind of rely on. So, like, what did you take from that and you brought back with you is what I'm interested in, because it's such an experience to go through all that. Like, what was the biggest thing you took away from
that? As I said, I think it was developing, empathy for what it was like being sick. I think developing empathy for what it's like to be lonely and feeling isolated, developing empathy, feeling like you were an outsider in places. So I think that really helped me out a lot to, as you said, I think I did also grow up in a bubble. I didn't, of course you don't realize it until you go to other places. I think it really taught me, and not only being in Ghana, but in all my travels, that all the places you travel are really, really different, but all those places, the way people live and lead their lives are simply just as valid as the lives we live wherever we are. And so I think you develop a tremendous appreciation for how other people live and what their mores are and values are and what their culture's like, and you see it. And I will say that one of the hardest things for me coming back from Ghana was, I grew up, I would say, with sort of all the material needs that I needed. And when you live in a place like Ghana, they're not materially wealthy. They're rich in so many ways, but not in that way. And I will say, and I've said this to my class, I do think they were the happiest groups of people that I've ever been around, in terms of just being happy and joyful and helpful and loving and friendly and open. And so I think I really learned from that experience was, and everyone knows this, but I think unless you experience that, material goods don't bring you happiness. And I think it's your relationships are fundamental to your happiness. So that's some of the most important things I learned from that experience.
Wow, that's awesome.
So, circling back to the Peace Corps, you said that you didn't know what you wanted to do out of college, but you found yourself interested in this and wanted to go and pursue it. So can you go into a little bit of like what your role was and what you found yourself doing there?
Yeah, so I think the Peace Corps wanted me to go into the realm of education, and I did not want to do that. There's a lot of members of my family who are educators in one way or the other. And I said, I don't really want to do what my family's doing. So, I did grow up on a little farm. Not that I did much, but we did have a garden that I helped out. So I went as an agricultural extension agent. So my job was to try to introduce vegetables to the diets of the particular community in Ghana, which is sort of in the middle of Ghana, because their diet is mostly based on starches. So the idea was to introduce more vegetables. So I set up demonstration plots growing, tomatoes and greens. And then using, double digging and using fertilizer and those kinds of things to help them. I sold cutlasses and seeds. So that was my job. And I think the other thing that I learned a little bit, first of all, I'm just out of college, and I never really was a farmer. And if you shake my hands, shake my hands there and shake my hands there. And what do you notice right away about my hands? I mean, are they grizzly and callousy?
No,
and
no.
Smooth.
I don't want to say it.
So, right away, I was dealing with farmers who completely knew right away that, I was a complete imposter. I think they knew right away that I didn't know what I was talking about. But they were probably more helpful to me than I was to them. And I would say, also my demonstration plots were like huge failures. So here I was, trying to teach them how to farm and trying to grow crops that they didn't grow, and they didn't work out very well. But the good thing was I ran a little mini store where I sold seeds, which they needed, and then I sold cutlasses or machetes. And machetes are used just to do about everything when you're living in rural Ghana. So that's how you clear your plots and do a lot of your digging. And so they definitely valued me for being someone who ran a store and provided them with those kind of goods. But they definitely knew that I wasn't really a very experienced farmer and didn't know what I was talking about in that regard. So what was your question? I forget if
No,
you
answered it perfectly. Just get an idea of what you did in the Peace Corps, and
And one more thing about that, I went into the Peace Corps, and I think a lot of people do it to try to find myself. I was lost directionally. I loved college, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, which is, I know, it's not a bad thing. I will tell you that I came home from Ghana more lost than when I went. And I was pretty lost when I went. So I came back and I really had no idea what I wanted to do.
Wow. So I think to go off of that, because I kind of just made the next question, like, was there, for some people it's in college, and for some people it's their first job, it's their second job, but did you have a pivotal moment where you thought that maybe I want to teach, maybe I want to be a part of something else, help younger people?
Yeah, it's so weird to think about how things work out in one's life. So I was lost, kind of floundering, had no idea what I was doing. So I don't know what happened was, and I was sort of looking for jobs, not in the teaching world. And a friend who was older than I am was the head of school in the northwest corner of Connecticut, the Indian Mountain School. I've known him for a long time, where I've gone for my summers forever. And he happened to know that I was not really doing anything, looking for work. And he said, "Perry, would you mind coming out to the Indian Mountain School? Unfortunately, I've had to let a teacher go, and I need someone to teach for the second semester." And again, I don't know. I figured I'm not doing anything else. I might as well try this on, see how it is. So I went for that semester, and I really enjoyed doing it. It's a 5th through 9th grade boarding school. And I stayed there for another 4 years. So I think about this a lot. Like, if he hadn't offered me that job and really said, "Perry, you'd be really helping me out a lot if you did it for a semester," I don't know where I'd be, which is interesting to think about. So it was just sort of luck, just sort of happenstance that I got that job, and it was just a phenomenal group of people. So it was, I think, working at a junior boarding school for 4.5 years was great training for coming to a secondary school like Govs. Made a lot of great friends. So, but it was just, again, it was sort of a weird intersection in my life, and somewhat lucky. Yeah.
So you were there. How did you find your way to Govs, and how long did it take you to get here?
So I was at Indian Mountain for those 4.5 years. I went and got my master's in education. And then in my master's program, was a very good friend of mine from Williams, who I played soccer with. And he had been a teacher here. And he said, "Perry, I know that there's a job opportunity available at Governor Dummer. Maybe you should go look at it." And I said, "Oh, thanks." So the job was in the admissions office, teaching 2 history classes, living in a dorm, and helping coach the varsity soccer team, with Mr. Karen. So that's how I ended up coming here.
Wow.
So again, I think it was pretty fortunate that my friend John, Freiberg, who worked here, said, "Yeah, Perry, why don't you go up and check this job out?" So that's how, and I started on July 1st, 1987.
I think it's wonderful that you talk about kind of, you say these happy accidents that you ended up in Africa, ended up at your first school, and then ended up eventually at Govs. But I think we have a lot of people in this school that are very worried about what they're going to do in life and what school they're going to go to. And if I don't go to this school, I can't do this. But I think your advice you just shared is, wherever you are, sometimes you can't decide. Like you just don't know. And you just got to let life take its course, right? So.
Yeah, I think, being able to live with that kind of uncertainty is a good thing to be able to do. And I think I always knew that I was going to be okay in some ways. I think I was really anxious about it, but I wasn't, completely anxious about it. Yeah. And sometimes things, I don't think, that, it's funny, as I look back at my life, I go, it's exactly, I think, what I would have really wanted to do if I could have designed my life. But it's not as if I had designed it that way. Mm-hmm. It just sort of happened to be that way. So I feel very, very lucky, and I'm obviously really lucky to have been here for 37 years.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, clearly, as you just said, you've been here for a while, so we want to know, what has been one of your favorite Gov stories? Funny, anything, just you've kind of seen it all.
So much is funny. The whole every day working with people like you guys is funny. Bring great joy and amusement to my life, and a lot of other things. I don't know. I'm not sure there's that many, funny things. I think there's just things that I really enjoy. I don't know. I think one of the I don't know. I think a few years ago, the senior prank was, to put all of our cars in the rink. I thought that was a great prank. And of course, I had my VW camper bus, and of course, none of the seniors can drive a stick shift. And driving the bus isn't that easy to do. I just thought it was funny that they asked my wife to help them, so she actually was the one who drove the bus down into the hockey rink, and then they filled it up with whatever they filled it up with. But I don't know if you've heard that story. But
no, I never heard that.
That was a really good prank. I don't know. Living in the dorm all those years. Ray Long will tell you this. When he was a freshman, I was the dorm parent there, and one snowy afternoon, they built this huge snowball, and they brought it they were trying to get it to the top floor of cottage. And I thought that was really, really funny. And I eventually sort of saw them do that, and whatever, they managed to get it out. There's a lot of things like that. I remember years ago in Cottage, on a beautiful spring day, there was 4 kids were playing golf about 100 yards away. And I probably should have never done this, but there was, in the third floor of Cottage, they had opened the windows up. So they pulled all the windows down. So there was a hole about this big. And I said, I bet one of you cannot put the golf ball through that narrow hole up there, which I should have never done. And one of them got really close, and actually the golf ball, went through, I think, the 4 panes of glass. Again, I don't know. I just thought it was a pretty good shot.
Oh yeah, it's got to.
They came within inches of having better than a hole-in-one. There's a lot of little things like that happen in a dormitory with kids that you're living with. So I don't know. All the trips I've gone on with students have been incredibly rewarding. A whole bunch of trips, with Mike Heron, starting in Canada, to going to Italy, and then I'm going to Madrid in Spain, and I continue the tradition, going to Barcelona, then to London, taking groups of kids to Vietnam was amazing. Taking a group of 2 kids with Mark Gary to Kenya was amazing. So, as I look back on it, I think we've stopped doing that as much as we did. But, I found those trips to be amazing. And whenever I talk to students who've been on any of those trips, they always talk to me about how meaningful those trips have been to them. So those aren't funny things, but just really meaningful things that I've done.
Oh, I think, and it isn't, it doesn't have to be like a laugh out loud story, but it's all those little things that, like, for some reason on a snowy day we build a sledding hill and it's got like a big jump. It's just the little things that you remember like that, and it's just for students who are here now, and you've been here for so long, that some of these stories, it's just like everyone can relate to them, whether you're a student or a faculty member, and you just spoke of your trips so highly. Like, I can tell in your eyes that those trips meant the world to you, and you remember them still today.
Yeah, so, I think for the same reasons that I got so much out of my travels, just being exposed to how other people live just makes your life that much richer in so many ways. And one more story, and this relates to Miss Fitzgerald, because she was the dean at the time, but one of my tennis players at St. Mark's, after our tennis match, walking from the courts to the bus, they have an outdoor swimming pool, and he decided to jump in the pool just to cool off. And of course, we have a no swimming rule. I was behind him or ahead of him, I don't know. But he, of course, got into trouble for that. But I'll never forget, he went to see Linda in her office, and he said, I have 2 words for you, Miss Fitzgerald. And he said, carpe diem. I don't know, and I think she probably held him accountable in some way or the other. But those stories I remember really well. They're pretty funny. So he survived, and we survived that experience.
That's awesome.
I mean, you mentioned you traveled in the Stark area a lot.
Yeah,
and I see your Williams logo right here. We've heard about your infamous intramural basketball team.
I played basketball, but I did not play on that team. But he did. So I got to know Mark. Mark was we got to know each other pretty well. I was really lucky, and the football team practiced right near, right on the soccer fields on the edge of it. So all the football team would watch our Wednesday games, and there was great camaraderie between the football players and the soccer players. But no, Mark played on an intramural team. He was very, very good. But I would go and watch those games. But I was never on those teams. Yeah, and he was a very good football player and a very good basketball player.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and he ran track, and he was very successful in track as well. And he's been a good friend, and of course I'll miss him because he's leaving.
Yeah. It's crazy, again, just going back to your point of just how things work out, that I'm sure at that time you would have never ever thought that you guys would have been teaching together for as long as you did, and I'm sure a friendship that you're so thankful for, having someone like that around.
Yeah, and as you know, he worked for the same kind of junior boarding school that I did at Eaglebrook, but he worked there for many, many more years than I did. I was 4.5 years. I don't know, he must have been 12 or 15 years. So we have that common experience as well. I think we'd both say, coming here from working at a junior boarding school, we've sort of been, on vacation sort of the rest of our life. Just the amount of duty you do at a junior boarding school is unbelievable. Because younger kids, they need to be supervised 24 hours a day. And it was your job 7 days a week really to supervise them. So it was an incredibly demanding job. Just, let's see, Mr. Satow we had a junior boarding. Mr. Siglarski was. There's a bunch of them, and I think they'll tell you it's a great training ground for coming to a place like Govs in terms of the kind of commitment it takes. Obviously the commitment to the classroom, but the commitment to everything you need to do outside the classroom that I think makes this experience so meaningful for teachers, and for you students.
Sure.
Yeah. So I bet dealing with those kids at that school was definitely a lot for you. Were there any maybe certain lessons that they taught you that you kind of really taken away from those experiences?
I mean, like here, I got to be really good friends with a lot of them and did things with their families. I think, a lot of it, and I'll go back to my years as a dean of students. That you want to provide spaces that are really, really safe so kids can make mistakes. And then you want to, of course, hold students accountable for their mistakes, but there's so many great lessons, as we all know, from all the mistakes we make. So be in a place where you feel safe and free enough to take risks and maybe take a wrong turn now or then, but you're going to be held accountable, and you're going to really learn from those. mistakes you make.
Yeah, 100%. That's why this environment's so awesome, right? You can make mistakes on tests or in life, and you guys, you guys hold us accountable, but you also help us to get better at some of the things that we're not as good at. But a question that we ask all of our guests, because you guys have a lot of great wisdom, is what's a piece of advice that you'd give to someone where you are now, to someone who's a little bit younger and they got a lot of their life ahead of them, and what's one thing that you would advise them to do, or one piece of advice that you would hope they take with them?
I mean, I think there's I think just have as many experiences as you can. I would say there's that saying, I forget who said it, and unexamined life isn't worth living, but an unlived life isn't worth examining, if you flip it around. And so just be, and it's hard because it takes so much courage and it takes bravery to be really open to new experiences that make you really anxious and uncomfortable and nervous. But I think the more experiences you have like that, you have a much better understanding of life, and of course a much better understanding of yourself. So out of those experiences, I think comes tremendous self-knowledge. And you asked, and to go back to my Ghana days, that was a survival experience, I would say, in a lot of ways. So I learned that I can survive. I can survive some really, really challenging, tough, sort of traumatic times, and you learn through going those that you get over them. There is another side, and unless you have those experiences and reach the other side, you don't have the confidence to know that there is another side that's going to be much brighter than where you are presently. But you almost have to go through it to learn that lesson. I can't tell you that. I think maybe through high school. I'm sure high school is not an easy time. You've experienced that. You've been through really hard times, and you've gotten really, really disappointed about things. But the next week you're doing okay, despite feeling at that moment like it's the end of the world. And the only way to learn that is to have your own experiences like that. So that's what I would say, is keep having those kinds of experiences that put you in all kinds of different situations that really, really, I think, stretch you.
It's amazing.
Well, I think we're all good. I mean,
you absolutely killed it.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Can I just add that I would love to say that it's really fun. I would say I've been through 37 graduations here, and this one's really meaningful. Obviously because Walter just graduated, and following the footsteps of Henry. But I was going through the Facebook, and it was really fun to go through the Facebook, and this is another reason why it's so meaningful for me. I think it's 70% of this year's senior class I've had in class, or in the dorm, or on third soccer, or on the tennis team, which is a really,
that's a massive,
I mean, that's a huge percentage. And one of the reasons was that I'm teaching 3 sections of world history this year, but I taught 3 sections 2 years ago. So I had a lot of you. I've never had you in class, haven't had you, Aaron, in class, but I've always, then I looked at the other people, and I've always been, I would say, a fan from afar of all the people who I didn't teach, whether it's watching you, Aaron, with volleyball or hockey or whatever, or whatever, lacrosse in the spring, right? I think I get in the sports, right? And you, Colston, for watching you with your hockey or whatever. So I've had that. And then the other thing that's really interesting for me, so it's, I've gotten to know a lot of you, just having real direct contact. And then the other fun part about this year, I will divulge to you that it's also my 50th high school anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah. So it makes me think about, it has made me more think about what my high school career was like, graduating in 1975, and kind of comparing it and contrasting to Walter's graduation and your all graduations and what your 4 years have been like
Yeah.
compared to my 4 years at a big public high school, Lincoln Sudbury. And I won't give you a soliloquy what Lincoln Sudbury was like, but I can tell you, I'll tell you those who are watching, please watch the movie Dazed and Confused.
Confused, okay.
You might not have ever heard of it, but if you want to have an understanding of Mr. Nelson's high school career, I would say there's a lot that went on in the movie that captures my 4 years at Lincoln Sudbury. But to add to that, I will say that the reason I think my experience ended up to be a great one at Lincoln Sudbury is I had 3 or 4 teachers who really cared about me and believed in me. And I'd say the great thing about Govs is all of you have had 3 or 4 or more people who just have really believed in you. And I think that makes all the difference in the world.
100%. And you're one of those people. Even though we didn't have you as a teacher, you're always around. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
That was
great.
great.
So much.
Thank you.